Brent, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
I am really looking forward to speaking with you because I think most people who listen to this show live in cities, and I think most people want their cities to be better. That's probably a fair statement. And yet, in some cities across the country, I think we're having conversations that maybe aren't rooted in research and data. So I figured you were the perfect person to talk to.
That was very diplomatic. Okay.
The first thing I wanted to ask you about is this anti-cycling narrative that we're hearing online, particularly in the city where I live in Toronto, because it has always been my assumption that we want more people cycling. It makes sense for a whole lot of reasons. And yet we're having these debates today about ripping out bike lanes, which looks like it may happen, and a lot of hate and sort of distrust towards the cycling community, which is a bizarre place to be. What's going on here?
Well, even calling it the cycling community kind of makes me cringe a bit because it's sort of us versus them, which is exactly what they're trying to do. Let's be really clear. There are some folks out there that might just have it wrong, not understand the concept of geometry in cities, that the more space we take, the less people can move, especially as our population is growing. All the other implications about how we get around, there might just be some folks who just don't get it yet. But there are a lot of people who are lying about it. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm someone who's worked directly and been in decision-making rooms for over 33 years. And I can tell you definitively that there are politicians out there that have been told by their advisors that this is an effective wedge issue. It's a small percent of the public that actually thinks we should get rid of bike lanes, but they're the type that tend to base their vote on that action. So it's a very effective political strategy. They are lying. They are deliberately misinforming, and most of them actually know it. And so I get tired of being asked to sort of rebut the lies as if it's a good faith argument or a debate between opinion versus opinion, when it is really a debate about between evidence and deliberate misinformation. That's exactly what it is. So you apply that reality to the bike lane debate. You can call them cyclists. You can sort of uh, create a divisive kind of feeling. There's even studies that have shown that people, when they're in their vehicles, look at cyclists as somewhat less than human. I just said it. I just said cyclists. People on bikes are seen as less than human. It is an effective psychological and political strategy, but it is incredibly irresponsible. It leads to people dying. It leads to cities getting worse and less successful for everyone, including drivers. So it doesn't just need to be rebutted. It needs to be called out for what it is, which is deliberate political lies. And by the way, media lies too, because media folks have realized, boy, it gets good clicks. So, what I say is if you hear anyone talking about the war on the car, which is a term invented by the infamous, or term created by the infamous, this passed away mayor of Toronto, Rob Ford, if they're using that language, that they're lying to you, that they're trying to make you feel attacked by the people who are just making other choices. And frankly, choices that are actually helping you because there are fewer people in cars in front of you. That's just geometry. And it's either politicians trying to trick you into voting for them or media trying to trick you into clicking. That's just the truth.
So you mentioned the word evidence, and I would love to dive into that piece of it because I've been following you for a really long time. Let's talk about some of that evidence. Let's talk about cities where there are lots of people who bike. I'm going to stop calling it the cycling community. What's happening in those cities?
Well, there are cities where riding bikes is a very high percentage of the mode share. In other words, the percent of all trips in the city by each type of mode. But, I almost don't want to talk about those because those are the Amsterdams and the Utrechts and more recently the Parises. And they are very inspiring about a city like Paris is very inspiring about how fast it's been transforming its transportation infrastructure. It's not succeeding because it's an old city. It's succeeding because of new leadership. But in North America, there's often that whole, oh, well, yeah, but we're not Amsterdam. Doesn't this guy understand that we're not Amsterdam? Yeah, I get it. We're not Amsterdam. But we could be a lot smarter at what we do. And that's why I like cities that are doing it that are a bit counterintuitive. When Calgary built did the smartest central area bike lane pilot and got a unanimous vote of council based on evidence that put in place their permanent bike lane. And then Edmonton, the other big Alberta city, I joke that the Battle of Alberta isn't just about hockey, it's about political credit. When they saw Calgary getting attention, they just went ahead and did the same or similar kind of bike network based on Calgary's success without a pilot. And I say, you can be inspired by Amsterdam, you can be inspired by Paris. I can flood you with stats and evidence. But what I say is when two Alberta cities know enough to do this, what's your excuse?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. I probably asked this question a little bit selfishly because I have a 16-year-old son and he likes to bike. We all like to bike. And yet I'm fearful of him biking on some of our streets in Toronto and even more so now, thinking that some of the bike lanes may be ripped out. So, I think this affects the quality of life in our cities. And that's the piece to me that seems like it's missing from these conversations.
Mm. Well, that's because the deliberate tactic is to create an us versus them. When the truth is, and listen, I'm not a bike activist. Our family rides our bikes sometimes, but we walk and take public transit much more often than that. I'm not trying to pl- be part of this culture war that they are trying to create. I'm an expert on cities that is evidence and that is evidence based. And the simple fact is this: if you understand all the goals we have for our cities, how to accommodate more people with less public costs and less space and lower emissions and fewer greenhouse gas emissions, particularly, better public health, more equity, more choice, more freedom, every definition of success I can talk about, shifting trips away from cars, from a straight geometry, and through more choice, not forcing anybody, but just providing more choice, more freedom. How can that be a bad thing? And the evidence shows that when you do that, it works better for everyone, including drivers, because they're trying to say that when you give anything to any of these other groups of folks trying to get around in any other ways, it's somehow hurting drivers. You're taking something away from the majority. That's just bad math. That's just bad sense of geometry. Because as I often say to folks when we're talking to them, if you don't want to stop driving, or you can't stop driving because frankly we've designed car dependency, then you will and can keep driving. But it's in your best interest to make sure that your neighbor on one side chooses to ride a bike, and neighbor on the other side chooses to take public transit. Your other neighbors walk, particularly for short trips, which take up half the trips in our city. It blows our mind that half the trips in our cities are short trips, not long commuter trips or trips across the city to take your kids to hockey practice. Half the trips in our city are short trips that could reasonably easily, for many people, be converted into another kind of trip if they choose to. That works better for everyone. What we know is when you design car dependency, it fails for everyone, including drivers, because you're all stuck in traffic. That's just common sense. That really is just common sense. And it really bugs me when the people who are lying to you try to take the words common sense. More people drive, so we should plan for drivers. That's just common sense. No, that's a lie being called common sense. The actual common sense is the more people in your city who can move in less space with lower public costs and lower emissions and cooling the city because we're getting hotter and cleaning the air because the air is getting worse. All of that is common sense.
I totally agree with you, and yet at the same time, I also worry about this push for a return to the office and the issues that we face in some of our cities in terms of more traffic congestion, more cars on the road. This feels like one of those issues that no one has really thought about, or maybe they're lying about. I don't know what the answer is, but certainly, most of us who actually do like the idea of common sense can also do basic math, and with more people going to the office and more cars on the road, no matter how many bike lanes you ripped out, it's not going to get better.
Yeah, someone said to me recently that it's not more traffic, it's just returning traffic to how it was before the pandemic. But that's not exactly true. It is doing that, but add 5 or 6 years of population growth. So that's more cars. And we already had trouble before the pandemic. And ironically, for the 33 years I've been a planner, we have been talking about work from home as a component of the strategy for addressing the crushing congestion, etc. And we could never, I remember talking about this in the 90s, and we could never think of how can we ever get work from home to be higher than 5%, 2 or 3%, 5%. Because if you could get work from home to 10% or 20%, it would be revolutionary. Imagine taking off 20% of the cars, out of every 5 cars. That would be a significant change. Um, and and then we had it in the pandemic. If there's a silver lining to a horrible thing, and I'm not flippant about saying that, my dad died of COVID during the pandemic.
I'm sorry.
So there's no real good that came out of it. But if there is a silver lining that came out of it, it's suddenly we all got good at the technology, the culture, realizing we didn't have to take so many physical trips. We could do things virtually. If anything, there might have been of an overshoot. The idea that suddenly everything could be virtual. But instead of coming back after the pandemic and finding a new equilibrium that embraced the idea of work from home being part of a strategy, you've got business owners or business runners just unilaterally making decisions saying, we want you back to 4 days right away, and next year, 5 days a week, because we're not convinced your efficiency is good, even though studies suggest your efficiency is still pretty good. It probably depends on the nature of the position. Well, it does depend. But so there needs to be a conversation about how it affects society, not just the businesses, because that tends to be the beginning and the end of the media discourse. How does it affect efficiency? As if all we are cogs in a machine instead of people trying to operate a society in a way that works well.
I think those of us too who do follow data and evidence-based decision making, there's a ripple effect to a lot of these choices. Not to get totally off track, but I was just a few minutes ago listening to a news report that said with this return to the office, what's happening is there's a real discrepancy between wages for men and women, because a lot of women have chosen not to go back to the office and they're taking jobs that actually pay less. So we're seeing the past couple of years that women are earning less because of decisions like this. So there's a ripple effect to some of these decisions that haven't been thought out. And yet, like you say, I don't think we've ever had more data or people who have expertise talking about these issues.
Well, I'll see your ripple effect and raise you. So people, especially women, but not just women, are making choices to work from home and take less pay. So that affects gender parity, etc. And that needs to be part of the conversation. But you're also, at the time when you were moving towards work from home almost too much, there was the risk that companies were essentially making public all of their operating costs. Instead of having to pay for office space, let just everybody work from their home. We get to save office space money, but maybe, all the costs and consequences of this become part of the public realm and addressed through taxes. That's a ripple effect I was trying to force the conversation toward in the context of the pandemic. We need to think these things through. And to me, that's an implication of doing too much work from home. Also, it devastates our downtowns, which are our economic engines. And people don't realize that if they've never gone downtown, if they don't work downtown, if they ignore downtown, they are still highly dependent on the downtown keeping their taxes low, because if it isn't for the economic engine of downtowns in North America, we'd all be suffering with less service and more higher taxes. So these are ripple effects to these decisions that are about the public interest. And yet again, we're having the conversation like, oh, it's just the business owner's choices. They can do whatever they want. There has to be a conversation about the implications, the larger public implications, the ripple effects, as you say.
Absolutely. And I think also another thing that at least I'm seeing happen, and when I've been looking at some of the things that you're writing about, I know you're talking about this as well, is that as our cities get more populated, as we have less room for cars to move around, the
Mm.
vehicles are actually getting bigger. You know, I every couple of days see a
Yes.
Cybertruck in downtown Toronto, and I look at it and think there's just not room on these streets for this truck. Like, whether you like Elon or not, there's just not a lot of space for a truck like this. And I'm reminded of a quote that you shared in your feed that said, innovation makes useful things smaller and smaller. Overconsumption makes things bigger and bigger and more dangerous with bigger costs and consequences. I would love you to unpack that.
Well, the Cybertruck is the latest super obnoxious example of this, but it didn't need such a fundamentally ugly and ridiculous vehicle to make the point for us that vehicles were too big already. And it's just as much about your standard family SUV as it is about someone who's making a choice in this day and age to support Elon Musk financially. So this was already a problem. And it was playing out in before the Cybertruck, it was the idea of an electric Hummer. And does your brain break at the concept that a Hummer can be good? Well, of course it's not good, because it takes the battery materials and energy of 5 or 6 smaller vehicles to make a Hummer green, which it isn't. And by the way, we have Jevons paradox, which says that every time we've improved the technology and made something greener, people end up using it more. So we've actually seen the studies show that per capita, our emissions are going up because we're driving further. We're driving more. Ironically, a lot of people are buying a third vehicle, and that's the electric vehicle. They might have stayed at 2 if it weren't for the electric vehicle. Now, I'm a supporter of electric technology as an alternative to internal combustion vehicles, but not if we end up driving more and further. So you've got the added issue of, with your vehicles getting bigger, it's kind of like, how can we take a bad situation and make it worse? We've already got too much driving, too much car dependency, no choice really in our design of cities and suburbs, particularly for other ways of getting around. And now let's add to that, we're going to make the vehicles even bigger and more dangerous, not just bigger to hold people, more kids, more groceries. Let's make the front inherently more dangerous so that it's far more likely to not see a kid and to kill a kid when it hits the kid. And so we have this cumulative effect going on of too much driving, too much car dependency, and the vehicles getting more polluting or using more materials if they're electric and still polluting because there's still tire pollution, etc. And at the same time, becoming more dangerous in the name of an arms race for more safety. I've got to have a bigger vehicle or else I'm not keeping my family safe. And everybody outside your vehicle is in greater danger, legitimately greater danger. And we have to remember the number one killer of kids and teens in the entire world is car crashes.
It's so sad when you do look at all of this data, and I would love to talk to you more about this. But I also want to talk a little bit about some cities that are maybe getting it right here at home, here in Canada, if that is actually happening. And I ask that because as someone who is a keynote speaker, I've traveled all across this country to small cities, medium-sized cities, large cities, and it strikes me that some cities are better than others. Top of mind, I don't think there's one city that I think of where I think, oh, they've nailed this. Like, public transit is really efficient. Cycling is possible for everybody, and it's safer for everybody. Are there things happening in this country that you can point to that you leads you to a little bit of optimism about this topic?
I think there are cities that are doing things better, and that's inspiring to me. I can't point to. I recently collaborated with the mayor of Paris to do an exhibition at City Hall in Paris about climate action through city building. And one of the points I made is I haven't seen a city that's doing things perfectly. I've seen cities that are trying harder and cities that are not trying at all. And frankly, are putting great effort into still protecting the wrong thing from change. But what inspires me are the cities that you don't expect to do better, but are. They are doing better. In Canada here, Montreal is probably the most inspiring city in North America in recent years. They're transforming streets into people places. They're doing safe bike infrastructure and shifting mode share. They're doing a lot of smart, good city building. Edmonton has been getting a lot of attention, not because the city is a perfect city, but because the planning system, the planning department, the leaders are doing bold things that you think, wow, I can't believe Edmonton is doing that. They were the first major Canadian city, major North American city to get rid of parking minimums and let that the answer for parking not be determined by an excessively high parking regulation at City Hall. And that's just one example of many things they've been doing in terms of innovation. I also like the smaller cities in Canada. I've been advising the city of Kingston, Ontario for 7 years now. And it's not that they're perfect, but boy, the transformation in culture and attitude and intention and aspiration and how it's translating into better planning. I'm inspired working with them every day. And it shows that cities of that size and vintage, they used to describe themselves as being very conservative, very hard place for things to change when I first started working for them. Now I'm starting to talk about the Kingston model instead of the Vancouver model as an inspiring North American model. And frankly, there are a lot more cities the size of Kingston than there are cities the size of Toronto. So I see inspiration everywhere I look, not because they're nailing it, but I like the cities that are trying to punch above their weight, that are not afraid to work harder, not window dressing. I'm not impressed by the cities that declare a climate emergency and just do business as usual, but the cities that are actually working hard to make change. And I've worked in city halls, so I know how hard that is. You can't do it on a dime, but you can do it a lot faster than any of us have given us the excuse to accept.